Hello, I'm Piers Corbyn from Weather Action Long Range Weather and Climate Forecasters, and we're here today on the 28th of March to talk about one of the coldest Marches for decades, and we're going to look at the complete nonsense which has recently come out from the global warmers camp to the effect that warm means cold. Okay. Now, it looks like it's going to turn out to be the coldest March since 1962. This, coupled with the snow deluges that have happened in the United Kingdom and Ireland, which we predicted, and in Europe and in the USA during the winter, later part of the winter, bears out, of course, things we said a long time ago about the impending mini ice age. And in fact, now we can say we are at the beginnings of a mini ice age, which means that we're going to have more of these cold winters, more wet summers, shorter growing season, the jet stream generally further south, more extreme events, and big hailstorms. Everything we said is being borne out by reality. Everything which the global warmers said, such as the end of snow by the start of this decade and endless heat waves in summers, have failed. All their predictions have failed. However, rather than give up, they've now started just to tell lies. They claim now that warming is leading to cold, and any extreme event which comes along, they say it's caused by CO2, even when we have predicted explicitly these things. For example, 2011, the list of extreme events produced by AccuWeather, who explain American weather, was put out for a study, and in fact every one of those was predicted by us in long range. Yet that and plenty of other things on the front page of newspapers such as The Independent, where we have predicted extreme events, they claim that these are caused by CO2. Now, the most recent things are from Sir John Bennington, the current government's chief scientific advisor. And I have to say that he has been putting forward disgraceful, baseless nonsense. They have a very convoluted argument about somehow ice changes in the Arctic have caused this high pressure. Now, this is a complete lie, what they're putting forward, and I will explain why. But first of all, Sir John actually said that the evidence that climate change, man-made climate change, driven by CO2, is happening is completely unequivocal, he says. Now that is a lie. It's not completely unequivocal. In fact, there is no evidence whatsoever for the theory of man-made climate change. And we challenge Sir John now to produce evidence that changes in CO2 in history using real data, real observed data, changes in CO2 have led to driving of changes in world temperatures. There's no evidence for such, but if he says it's there, we challenge him to produce. Now, what has he actually said about sea ice and the cold March? Well, what they say is that because of the lack of sea ice, somehow it's caused some pressure pattern change, and that's why we got this high pressure to the north of British Isles and this very cold. Well, let's have a look at this idea. There's a helpful graph recently come out from the American official sea ice measurements, where it shows that middle of March this year, the sea ice extent was exactly the same as the middle of March last year. Right. So if there's something in their theory, the weather last March should have been similar to the weather this March. But not at all. Last March was very warm in Britain and in the USA. This March in Britain and the USA has been extremely, extremely cold. So his theory falls at the first hurdle. Now, when you read related warmist drivel, such as in The Guardian, and also nonsense from Sir John and others, they say, yes, the real thing is that there was a minimum of sea ice last autumn. Okay. Now, if you remember, last autumn, we discussed this so-called minimum of sea ice. The graph from the American Sea Ice Measurement Organisation, very respectable body, says that this is area of ocean with at least 15% sea ice. Okay. Now, we pointed out last autumn that the implication of this is that when the winds disperse the ice, it drops below 50%, so the measurement is less sea ice, but there's still ice there. So we said their claims of lack of sea ice was nonsense, and when the wind dropped, the apparent sea ice would increase, and we'd be back to normal, and they would not report that. And that everything happened as we said. The wind dropped, the measured sea ice returned to normal by some magic super cooling system, they would have said, but they didn't tell us that. And they didn't report. Okay. So, the minimum of sea ice in the autumn was a delusion. It was a nonsense. But they used that as the basis of evidence for explaining what's happening now. However, of course, they predicted nothing. If it had been a warm March now, they would say it was to do with CO2. Anything that happens, they'll say it's to do with CO2. They can predict nothing, whereas we predict things. We predicted these snow events. We predicted this cold first half of March. And we thought it would have warmed up a bit by now, but it hasn't. Nevertheless, this is not evidence in support of anything they say. The reason for the sea ice fluctuating is the same as the reason for the 60-year cycles of many fluctuations around the world, which are solar, lunar interactions and are predictable. Now, they pointed out that there's been a decline of sea ice for about 30 years. Well, of course, we're in a 60-year cycle. In the next decade, there'll be an increase in sea ice in the Arctic. And by the way, all this time this has been going on, for the last many, many decades, the sea ice, or rather ice in the Antarctic, has been rising, rising and rising. The total amount of ice in the world has been going up for decades, not down. And historically, what happens in the Antarctic generally leads what's going to happen in the world. And this supports what we said about general cooling starting now and continuing. So, there's no evidence for the idea that man-made climate change is causing the current weather, and what has been put forward is a pack of baseless lies. And if any politician puts it forward, just tell them it is not true, and they should call these so-called scientists to account and demand evidence. Right, the message that we give now on what has to be done about weather and climate is that the global warmist madness must be stopped. And we've got to return to evidence-based science. And the new scientific advisor for the government, whoever he may be, must be made accountable to the people and has to support accountable evidence-based science. There is no other science. The rest is non-science and a religion. Now, the mini ice age is, of course, much more threatening than anything the global warmers have to say anyway. We've seen sheep dying in thousands in Scotland because of this very cold weather. And generally speaking, the shorter summers and colder winters are going to be a big blow for agriculture. This is a big danger for the world, and any elementary principle of precaution would be that you have to listen to these things. So we intend to organise public meetings where we will discuss the implications of the mini ice age. We'll have conferences about this and call governments to account and demand an end to this theft of your electricity charges, the imposed increases in loads of things in the name of saving the planet, which are nonsense, and demand that MPs stop following this gravy train, but instead support the people they were put there to represent. So go to your MP, go to your councillors and say, end the nonsense and fight for accountable evidence-based science. And come on our Weather Action website, buy our forecasts, join the discussions on the web, and take the matter forward. Thank you.